there's a truth most modern people could never imagine. In the Viking Age, the moment the sun went down, the entire world switched sides and became an enemy. Darkness wasn't the gentle backdrop of sleep. It was a doorway into a kingdom of danger, where cold could pierce bone as fast as a blade slipping from its sheath, where wolves left the deep forests in search of careless souls, where a single oar stroke echoing across a fjord was enough to make an entire family hold their breath. Night for the Vikings wasn't quiet. It was a realm of the unpredictable, and anyone who closed their eyes unprepared might never open them again. That's why, when the last light slipped behind the mountains, every longhouse turned into a temporary fortress. The heavy wooden bar slid into place like a ritual, acknowledging that darkness now ruled. Livestock were brought inside, not for convenience, but to share their warmth and listen for sounds humans couldn't catch. And the fire at the center of the home became the final signature of life. Every gust of wind howling outside was a reminder that they were stepping into a battle that would last until dawn, where the strongest person wasn't the one holding an axe, but the one who understood how to respect an enemy called the night. If you feel drawn to this perspective, leave a small sign, a comment, or a subscription, because many more secrets of the Viking night are waiting for you in the next chapter. In the Viking Age, a home wasn't just a place to sleep. It was the first line of defense against a world full of uncertainty, and every longhouse was built as if it were born to withstand storms, wild beasts, and even the hidden footsteps of people moving in the night. When the sun disappeared behind the northern mountains, the heavy oak door was pulled tight into its stone groove, like a silent declaration that from this moment on, the family's survival depended on the strength of every timber and the precision of every joint. The walls of wood and turf weren't made for beauty, but for an unending battle against skin-cutting winds, built so well that the inside of a longhouse stayed dozens of degrees warmer than the outside, while livestock were placed at both ends not just for convenience, but to stay alert and radiate warmth like living furnaces. Weapons were never hidden but kept within arm's reach. Axes leaning against posts, spears set upright by the walkway, each one existing to deliver a clear message. Stepping inside meant stepping into a place ready to resist. A longhouse, therefore, wasn't just a roof over one's head, but a finely tuned survival machine, where every beam and every breath fused into the final shield against the darkness. And in the tense silence of those nights, the Vikings learned that to survive, a home had to be as strong as the people who lived inside it. In the Viking world, a home wasn't judged by its size, but by the thing standing silently above everyone's head, the roof. It wasn't just a cover against the rain, it was the final boundary between life and a cold death, so absolute it couldn't even produce a last scream. When snowstorms swept down from the north, snow didn't fall softly like in modern romantic images. It packed like stone, dense and heavy enough that just 30 centimeters could snap a roof beam. And when a beam broke, it wasn't only wood that fell. The family beneath could be buried alive in ice within minutes. That's why Viking roofs were built at angles so steep that outsiders thought they were made for decoration, when in reality, every degree was calculated from centuries of experience, so snow would never have the chance to gather into an invisible killer. What surprises many people is that the turf layer covering the roof, always damp and heavy, didn't just insulate. It resisted fire in a way that almost mocked warfare. Some accounts describe enemies firing flaming arrows at Viking roofs, but instead of bursting into flames, the fire died instantly on the wet earth, as if the house itself swallowed it. In the darkness of stormy nights, the sound of snow sliding off the roof was like the sigh of a giant. And every time the roof survived that weight, the family inside breathed a little easier, knowing it had passed yet another life or death test. If this perspective opens up parts of Viking engineering no one talks about, leave a small comment to let me know you want to dig deeper into the other secrets hidden right above their heads. Inside a Viking longhouse, there was one rule that was never spoken aloud, but everyone understood. The central fire was never allowed to die, not even for a single breath. It wasn't darkness they feared. They had lived with it since the day they were born. But because when the fire went out, the cold didn't creep in slowly. It rushed in like a beast that had been waiting for hours, immediately swallowing the entire house. The Vikings knew this so well that every night before everyone slipped into their cautious sleep, someone would lean down and cover the glowing embers with a handful of ash, like draping a thin blanket over them. Just one small action, yet it decided whether they would wake in the warm breath of life or in a room where each exhale turned into a faint mist, signaling that the body was about to surrender. That fire didn't just keep them warm. It was the first thing they looked at when a noise came from the door, the invisible weapon that made an intruder hesitate, the comfort that calmed a child startled awake, the heartbeat of the entire house. A spark bursting from a burning log didn't just light up a stranger's face, it sent a clear message. This home is awake and ready to strike back, but that same fire was also their greatest danger. All it took was a single ember rolling into a pile of dry straw for an entire village to become a sea of flames in minutes. That's why every night, before the door bar slid into place, every corner of the home was inspected, every torch was put out properly, every dying ember watched with the same careful attention as if they were tending to a sleeping beast. If you want to explore more of the secrets behind this heart of fire, in Viking architecture, leave a comment. Just a small sign is enough to let me know you want to keep going into the darkness with them. For the Vikings, wooden locks and weapons could only stop enemies with physical form. What hid in the darkness? Draugr, the dead, the curses of those who died with hatred, was what truly kept them awake at night. That's why every home carried a layer of defense most visitors would never notice. Tiny runic scratches like claw marks, iron charms hanging at the door, and even fragments of human bone hidden beneath the threshold. These weren't decorations. They were invisible borders between the living and whatever they believed was standing outside, quietly watching. The fear of Draugr was so strong that some families refused to say the name of the dead after sunset, afraid the spirit would wake. The vulva, female seers, were invited during the winter when nights were longest, carrying charm bags made of braided hair, carved stones, raven feathers, and sometimes even the bones of a recently deceased family member, because they believed something carrying human essence could trick other spirits. These rituals were performed in absolute silence. A single misplaced sound was seen as a bad omen. The carvings on the doorframe weren't just for protection. They reminded everyone that there were things in this world that must never be taken lightly. And in that fragile balance between belief, fear, and taboo, the Vikings created the strongest spiritual shield they could. If you find this buried secret side of Viking life worth digging into, leave a comment to let me know you want to explore more of the darkness in their culture. In the Viking world, no one survived on strength alone. It was the community that acted as the true shield against the cold, wild animals and ancient blood feuds. But what most modern people never realize is that Viking villages weren't built randomly, like scattered clusters of homes. They were arranged with an almost ritual logic, like a massive defensive machine, where each family was a vital link. Longhouses often stood beside one another in a crescent or half-circle, forming an outer shell around the heart of the village, the livestock pens, the well, and the gathering area. With that layout, if an enemy broke in, they didn't face a single isolated house. They were immediately surrounded by the entire community, as if the very ground itself were siding with the Vikings. Rows of sharp stakes made from heavy, fresh timber were angled outward to repel the first strike, and the village gate was always locked with crossed wooden beams, strong enough that it took 3 people to lift them. At night, patrol groups walked the edge of the settlement with torches flickering in the snow-darkened air, and the firelight bouncing off the shields hanging on the walls made the whole village look like a giant creature with eyes in every direction. An unusual bark from a dog, a horse suddenly startled, or the wind cut by unfamiliar footsteps. All of it traveled instantly from house to house, like an encoded signal passed down for centuries. The strength of the Vikings came from the simple truth that if an enemy touched a single door, they had already woken the whole village. That feeling of being protected by dozens of ears, dozens of eyes, and dozens of axes transformed Viking communities into a living legend, a wall of flesh and bone no lone attacker dared underestimate. If you want me to go deeper into how these villages became natural fortresses, just leave a small comment. That will be the signal for me to open the next hidden layer. From the outside, a Viking longhouse might look rustic, even gentle, but that was only a shell meant to fool anyone who didn't understand that beneath that turf roof was an entire system of tactics designed to turn darkness into a weapon. The Vikings knew that the smartest enemies attacked when no one could see, so they made the night their ally. In front of the door, they often scattered sharp thorn branches, hidden under a thin layer of straw, enough to tear an intruder's feet and force a scream that revealed his position. In deep forest regions, they dug small pits camouflaged with dry leaves, not to kill someone outright, but to make him fall, create noise, and get stuck at the exact moment the household rushed out with axes in hand. Inside the longhouse, simplicity was its cruelty. The wooden ladder leading to the sleeping loft was pulled up every night, turning the ground floor into a natural trap. Any stranger stepping inside had no choice but to look up at the eyes already awake and waiting. Along the walls hung jars of fish oil, something that could be lit in an instant. Not to burn the house down, but to create a sudden burst of light that disoriented an intruder and turned him into a living target. Every detail was calculated so they didn't need tall stone walls. One wrong step was enough for the intruder to be betrayed by the very darkness he was hiding in. And it was this ruthless understanding that made the longhouse not just a home, but a massive trap for anyone bold enough to step inside. In the Viking world, the most terrifying enemy had no face, no roar, no footprints. It slipped through every crack like a patient, silent, and ruthless creature. The cold. The Vikings didn't see winter as a season, but as a voiceless predator, always waiting for the moment the human body weakened just enough for it to strike. Cold didn't attack like a beast. It tightened its grip like an invisible hand crushing the lungs, turning every breath into a small knife, stabbing the chest. That's why Viking longhouses were built like sealed nests, with thick turf on the roof, moss and mud packed into every gap, and families sleeping pressed together under animal hides so heavy that human warmth had to gather in one place just to fend off the invasion of the White Death. Even the breath of livestock was used as heat because in the longest months, a single cow could be a more important ally than a warrior. What made winter the most haunting was that it didn't kill in noise, but in false peace. There were mornings when people woke to find someone had been still for hours, passing so quietly that no one heard their final sound. In that frozen world, every night survived was a victory, and every dawn was a reminder that the predator was still out there, waiting for the next mistake. In Viking legends, people speak endlessly about warriors, axes, and longships cutting through icy waves. But what truly made an entire village's hands tremble wasn't an enemy with a sword. It was the winter storm. A northern storm wasn't just wind and snow. It was nature announcing its power, something strong enough to make even the most seasoned warrior bow his head in humility. The wind howled as if trying to tear each plank from the house. Snow gathered into white pillars, slamming into the turf roof, and the cracking of overloaded beams sounded disturbingly like human bones about to break. When the roof began to shake, no one stood there philosophizing. The Vikings rushed out as if they were fighting a flesh and blood enemy. They raised extra supports, wedged stones, used shields and spears to brace every corner of the house, turning every object into a weapon against the storm. Wealthier families showed off their strength by reinforcing their roofs with logs as thick as ship masts, while poorer ones used anything they had: water buckets, tables, even dried cod. Anything that could stop the roof from collapsing. But the most dramatic moment was how they protected the fire. One person kneeling to shield it with their own body, while another dug through the ash, searching for the living embers that could revive the only source of heat against the merciless night. Because if the fire died, the family died with it. It was in those moments when storms clawed at the roof that the Vikings learned something modern people often forget. Sometimes survival doesn't come from philosophy, but from endurance, and a little bit of reckless courage to challenge the sky itself. If you want me to dig deeper into these battles against nature that few books dare to describe, leave a small comment to let me know you're still following. There's one thing modern people can hardly understand. For the Vikings, sleep wasn't rest. Sleep was the most dangerous moment of the day. A gamble where losing even once meant the entire household would never wake again. They didn't have the privilege of letting go like we do. In a longhouse, wrapped in darkness, a single breath. That was too loud, or a shift that was too heavy could be enough for something lurking outside the door to hear. That's why Viking sleep was divided into two distinct phases. Light sleep, then waking in the middle of the night to keep watch, and only then daring to sleep again. A survival technique passed down through generations, not a random habit. In that moment of waking, The man of the house would sit up with his hand on the axe handle, listening to every sound filtering through the thick turf walls. The wind howling, snow sliding off the roof, livestock shifting. Those were normal. But if there was the muted crunch of a footstep in the snow, a faint creak at the door, or a dog changing its tone, then it was no longer a peaceful night. It was the sign of an enemy waiting for the moment humans were at their weakest. Viking children grew up with those sounds, hearing the metallic clink when their father shifted position to keep watch, hearing their mother's sharp breath when the wind changed, and learning from an early age that survival sometimes began with knowing when not to sleep deeply. Near the end of the night, returning to sleep wasn't surrender. It was placing trust in the fire, breathing under its blanket of ash, in the neighbors who were also awake in the house next door, in the dog outside the stall that hadn't dozed off yet. That vigilance formed an invisible network binding the whole community, so every sunrise arrived not as routine, but as a quiet victory. If you feel this philosophy of sleeping to survive opens a different window into the Viking world, leave a comment or subscribe to let me know you want to keep stepping deeper into the darkness with them.